Okay, we're going to do Siman Ayin Ches, Bezos Hashem, in the Shaggis Arya. And last Siman we discussed the chametz of a guy that you took responsibility for whether bittul works. Right? So the Shaggis Arya explained to us why bittul would not work on such chametz. And tonight we're going to discuss that same type of chametz, the chametz of a guy that you took responsibility for, but to examine it from a different angle, we want to know about the chiyuv of tashpisu, of removing it from your possession. Now, l'chachila, what you're supposed to do with it, and this he didn't discuss in length, but he just said over the halachos, so it's kedai to go over. I assume he'll discuss them later, maybe more in depth, we'll see, that you're supposed to either set aside a place in your house that it's for the guy, and then the guy can leave his chametz there, even though you have responsibility for it, but since you designated him a spot, it's not considered like it's in your house, and therefore you would not be over the isser of having the chametz in your property on Pesach. And the second thing you could do is to make a mechitza in front of it, 10 tefachim, so that also designates it like it's in its own spot, and that also you would not be over the isser if you did that with the guy's chametz. If you didn't do that before Pesach, so these eitzos, says the Shaggis Arya, you could do on Pesach itself. Right? It's only bittul that we spoke about in the previous year that you can't do on Pesach, because bittul works, as we explained, because of hefker, and you can only do hefker for something which is in your reshus, and the chametz is not really in your reshus, so the hefker won't work. But these types of takanos are ways of removing it from your house. Right? You're not literally removing it from your house, but halachically, at least in regards to the Sisser of Bal Yirah, it's considered as if you removed it from your house. If you make the mechitza in front of the chametz, or if you designate the spot to be used by the guy. So therefore you could do that on Pesach itself, right? Just like you could remove chametz physically from your house on Pesach. So to create a separate reshus within your house that belongs to the guy, right, there's no reason why it should make a difference whether that's on Pesach or before Pesach. Now the main point that he's going to be discussing in this siman is we know that by regular chametz, there's a chiyuv to get rid of it already starting from chatzos, Erev Pesach. That's learned from the pasuk of Shivas Yamim Matzos Tochelu, Ach Bayum Harishon Tashpisu Sor Mibateichem. That on the first day, and we learn in the Gemara that the first day really means Erev Pesach, on Erev Pesach already you have to get rid of the chametz. It's a chiyuv to get rid of the chametz Erev Pesach. Does that chiyuv apply to this type of chametz? The chametz that you have, it belongs to a guy, and you have responsibility for it. Now why would we think perhaps you don't have the chiyuv to get rid of it already on Erev Pesach? Because we know that the as we discussed in the previous year, the reason why I'm not allowed to have this chametz in my reshus is because of the pasuk of Shivas Yamim Sa'ar Lo Yimatzi B'Vateichem. That extra pasuk teaches us that even though it's not my chametz, nevertheless I can't have it in my property. That's the pasuk of Lo Yimatze. The isser of Lo Yimatze is only on Pesach itself. The other isser, or the chiyuv to get rid of the chametz Erev Pesach, that, as we quoted, was the pasuk of Shivas Yam Matzos Tochelu, Ach B'Yom Rishon Tashvisu Sarmi Bateichem. That pasuk maybe is not necessarily connected to the pasuk of Shivas Yam Sarli Matzos Bateichem. Even though the two pasukim are found near one another, they're both in the Parsha Bo, Parak Yud Beis. One is pasuk Yutes, that's the pasuk that talks about the guy's chametz. Pasuk Tezvav is the one that teaches us you have to get rid of your chametz early. So therefore it could be that everything in this parsha applies to one another, but not necessarily. It could be that the guy's chametz is only included in the pasuk of Lo Yimatze. It's not included in the pasuk of Tashbisu, which would mean I would not be allowed to have it in my house on Pesach, but to destroy it or to get rid of it Erev Pesach, I don't have a chiyuv. And that would make a nafkamina the whole day of Erev Pesach from Chatzos on, whether I have to be worried about this type of chametz. And he proves this point from a Tosfos, and this is the first Maramakom that we're going to see inside. The Tosfos says a similar idea. It's really actually Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. Maramakom Aleph, Ve'ila over the Pesach, And this is going on the Mishnah, which speaks about the chiyuv of chametz that's in a mixture, or chametz nukshe, which means chametz which isn't fully edible. So those types of chametz, the Mishnah says over in bepesach. Pesach Kuntras, Rashi explains lavar aleihem b'val yira b'al yamatzei. Over means that you're over the iser b'al yira b'al yamatzei. The gamri vami daknik lashon overim the mashma overim in ha'olam. Also the rivaz medaktik over means you have to get rid of it. Ve'in near the Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam doesn't think that's correct. The mashma d'chol hanach marbina kol machmetzes lo sochilu. All of these are included in the pasuk of all chametz you can't eat. That extra word all includes also the mixtures and the chametz nuksha. Va'afilu b'achila lo hayim. And you really wouldn't even be chayiv for eating this type of chametz. Ilav de Rab Yikraf. The pasuk didn't include it. Umehechi tesi bal yira bal yamatzeh. Where would we know that there's an isur bal yira bal yamatzeh? V'nir Rabbeinu Tam, and therefore it appears to the Rabbeinu Tam, the elu over in perish ha'ochlin va'overin hainu ma'al shulchan. It means you're not allowed to eat it. You have to remove it from the table. The lafni mechalin, because you can't eat them. But there is no isur bal yira. So what we see is that Tosafos' understanding, if there's a type of chametz that I wouldn't have thought was part of the isur, and I only know it because of a drasha, it can only be included in that pasuk that we have the drasha for. Since the drasha that teaches us that chametz in a mixture, or chametz nuksha, is asur, is a pasuk about eating chametz, so that I know that I can't eat that chametz, but it doesn't spill over to all of the isurim of chametz, and therefore there is no isur by Rabbi Yamatzeh. So if so, we could say the same thing by us, that we have a drasha to teach us that the chametz of a guy I'm not allowed to have in my possession on Pesach, but that's not going to spill over. I wouldn't have thought there was any isur without that drasha, and therefore it's not going to spill over to the isurim, the other chiyuvim of having to get rid of my Pesach, my chametz even erev Pesach. Okay, so that is the havamina. But in fact, the Shagas Aryeh wants to say that you really do have to get rid of this chametz even on erev Pesach. He's going to bring a couple proofs. Now, one of these proofs goes on a way long tangent, which is very interesting actually, and we're going to go into that. But just be prepared. Okay, so one of the rayas that you could be chayiv is from the Gemara, the Mishnah and Gemara in Pesachim Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph, which is the second Maramakom that we have printed. It says in the Mishnah, Ma bein Pesach Harishon L'Sheni. What is the difference between the first Pesach and the second Pesach? Means Pesach Sheni in ER for the people that weren't able to make it for the first Karban Pesach. So Harishon Asur Bal Yira Bal Yamatzeh. The first Pesach has the Isur Bal Yira Bal Yamatzeh. Vasheni, but the second Pesach Chametz Umatzi Mo B'Bayis. You have chametz and mas with you in the house. There's no chiyuv to get rid of your chametz on Pesach Sheni. Now the Gemara says, and this is part of a long discussion over here. I highlighted the parts that we'll see inside, but the Gemara goes through the drashas of figuring out exactly how we know which things apply on Pesach Sheni and which things don't apply on Pesach Sheni. So we're just going to jump into the middle. We'll see the part that we need to see. Is ma haprat mefurish mitzvah say velosa say v'shenitik la'aseh velosa say gamor af kol mitzvah say velosa say shenitik la'aseh velosa say gamor. So we include, there are mitzvahs that are specified that do apply on Pesach Sheni, and they include mitzvah say, losa say shenitik la'aseh, and regular losa says. And therefore all the rules that we're going to apply are going to apply to all those categories. Right? A regular los asay, a regular asay, and a los asay shenitik asay means it's a lav which has an asay that could fix up that lav. So we're going to skip down. The prate mai kamamai, what are we excluding in the prat? In other words, there are going to be things that are included and excluded in all of these categories. Some things that do apply on Pesach Sheni, some things that don't apply. And it's learned out from the Pesukim. What are we excluding? We're excluding lo yira v'lo yamatzeh. Dedami le dahai ein oloka. It's similar to this, that there's no malchus, to have a lav shenik laseh, because it's a lav which is fixed up by an aseh. V'hai ein oloka, to have a lav shenik laseh. This also, we're learning from the case of of lo yashir mimenu ad boker. You can't leave the Korban Pesach until the morning. That's a los asay, but it's fixed up by an asay, because whatever you do leave over until the morning, you burn. So it's a los asay, which then gets fixed up with an asay that you do the asay of burning it. So we're saying that is going to exclude a different type of asay, los asay shenit asay, which is the iser of lo yirav lo yamatzah. So what's the asay that's connected the iser of lo yirav lo yamatzah? Is the asay is tashbisu, to destroy the chametz. You're not allowed to have chametz, but there's an assay that you have the chametz to destroy it. So therefore it's considered a lav hanitik assay. So that's basically what we're pulling out from this Gemara. It's the first detail that we need for the proof that we're going to bring. Is that lo yirav lo yamatzah, those isurim are considered a lav hanitik assay. Okay, so now what? The klal is that in order to be a lav hanitik asay, there has to be that every single situation that you're over the lav, the asay applies. That's a rule that the Rambam says, and the Rambam says it clearly in Hilchos Temura, Parak Aleph Alpha Aleph, which we'll see inside. And we're going to see this entire Rambam inside because we're going to need everything the Rambam says in the continuing discussion. But what we're pulling out from the Rambam right now is this idea that every time you have an Isser of Bal Yirav Bal Yamatzeh, there has to apply also the mitzvah of Tashbisu. And that's, as we say in Temura, Kol Hamimir Loka. So Temura, for those of us that aren't familiar, is one of the more obscure halachos. It has a whole masechta, but not necessarily something that everyone's familiar with, is that if you have an animal that's designated for a carbon, you're not allowed to trade it for another animal. You have to bring the original animal that you made hektish, unless it gets a mum, and then you could redeem it, right? All the different types of rules. But if I have an animal that I'm allowed to use for a carbon, so I can't switch it for another animal. If I try to switch it for another animal, so generally, we're going to see the Rambam says that doesn't work in all cases, but generally, that original animal remains hektish, and the new animal also becomes hektish, plus the person did an isser, and possibly is going to get malchus. That's what we're going to discuss in this Rambam. Kol hamimar loka. Al kol behim v'him shiyamir. Anyone that does this isser, trying to switch the animal, gets malchus for every animal that he does this to. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, lo yachlifanu, lo yamir, so he can't switch it. Va'af al pi shelo asa ma'isa, even though he didn't do any action. Mipi hashmua lamdu shekol mitzvah salosa seishein b'ma'isa ein lokan aleha. The shmua is that any mitzvah losa say, which doesn't have an action that you did in order to be over the isser, there's no malchus. Chutz minishra mimar makalas chavi rishim, except for the three isurim of swearing, mimar, which is the isser we're talking about here, switching the karbanos. You didn't do anything, you just said that you're switching them, and being makal your friend with an name of Hashem. So those are three isurim that you didn't do anything, but you can still get malchus. Shoshalav and ilu efshar sheyeh behen ma'isa klal v'lokan aleihen. These three isurim, there is no ma'isa, but there's still malchus. V'lama lokan al hatmura. Now we're going to ask a separate question. Right? I took care of the problem of lav shein bo ma'isa because it's an exception to that rule. But I have another issue. Lama lokan al hatmura. Why should there be malchus? V'harei lav sheba nitik lasei. The lav is fixed up by an asay. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, "V'im hamar yamirenu." If you did do this, you tried to switch the carbon. V'hayahu utmurasu ya kodesh. Both it and what you're trying to switch it for both become kodesh. So that's an asay that I have to be noig with it as if it's kodesh. I mean, it is kodesh, so I have to do that. So it's a lav hanitik asay. There shouldn't be any malchus for it. So the Rambam gives two reasons why there is malchus, and it's not a lav hanitik asay. One reason is because there's only one asay, but there's two lavin. So the rule is, the Rambam is saying, if you have two lavin and one asay, you can still get malchus. Right? One lav and one asay to fix it up, no malchus. But two lav and one asay, you could get malchus. But another reason is, she'in lav shaba shaval asay. Because the lav is not the same as the asay. It means it doesn't apply equally in all situations. Shahat tzibur v'hashutfin in osin temura. A public or even just partners, they can't make temura. Vim afal pishin muzharin shel yamiru. It doesn't create a tumor if they do it, even though they have the isser. So this that we said that the new animal also becomes kadosh, that's only by an individual's carbon. But if I have partners in a carbon and they try to do a switch, the new animal does not become hektish. But it's still usher for them to do so. And therefore, if they would do that even on Shabbos, they get malchus. Sorry, I skipped a little bit. Nimsei Somer turns out, if the yachid does tmura, then the new animal does become hektish. And he's going to get malchus even if he did it on Shabbos. The echad min hashutrin shehimer, and if a partner tries to switch the animal, or he tries to switch a carbon tzibor, since there's a partnership with it, he gets malchus, but the new animal doesn't become kadosh. So we see that one of the reasons at least, that the Rambam says that there is malchus by tumur is because the asay doesn't apply in all situations. Because it does not apply to the case of the shutvin or the carbon seabor. In that situation, you don't have the asay that the new carbon becomes kadosh. And therefore, you can get malchus for the lav. If so, then bal yara bal yamatzeh, which is our lav, and we have tashbisu, to destroy the chametz, erev Pesach, which is the asay. If the Gemara says that chametz, that bal yara bal yamatzeh, is a lav hanitkel asay, that means every situation where there's an isser of bal yara bal yamatzeh applies the asay of tashbisu. Because if it wouldn't apply, then it would be like tmura, and you could get malchus, but the Gemara said you don't get malchus. Yeah?
Once someone burns his own chametz, you can't even at that point, or you still keep more. What's his name has a nice donut, but he has extra.
I mean, generally we burn chametz after the zman that's already usher to eat. But if you would destroy chametz before the zman, so then you could still eat, but that's generally not how it's done. So therefore, right, we're now going to bring a proof. I mean, we've now finished the proof, but I just have to explain it. That the guy's chametz, which I'm over by Rabbi Matzeh, it must be that I have the mitzvah tashbisu. Because if I didn't have the mitzvah tashbisu, then the whole isser by Rabbi Matzeh would not be a lav hanitik latzeh, and there would be malchus. And the Gemara says that there's not. So therefore, it must be that say applies also to the guy's chametz. That's the proof. However, says the Shagat Arye, that it's not a conclusive proof, because the Rambam himself holds that Bal Yara and Bal Yamatzeh is not a lav hanitik laseh. And that's in Os Daled, in the Rambam Hilchos Chametz Umatzah, Parak Aleph Halacha Gimel. Eino lo mishum lo yara v'lo yamatzeh, elam kein kana chametz v'pesach, o chimso kadei sheyasu b'maisa. The only way you can get malchus for Bal Yara Bal Yamatzeh is if you buy chametz on Pesach, or you make a dough chametz on Pesach, then you did something. But if you just had chametz from before, and you just didn't destroy it before Pesach, even though you're going to be over these two lavin, there's no malchus, because he didn't do anything. And therefore in those situations he's only get malchus to Rabbanan. So we see from Rambam is that in a situation where there is a Maisa, there is Malchus for Bal Yara Bal Yamatzeh, which is not what the Gemara said. Right? So, the way to explain the Rambam seems, at least the way the Shagas Ari is explaining, is that the Rambam must have a different girsa in that Gemara. But the Rambam does not hold that Chametz is Nitek Laseh. So therefore we lose our proof, right? Our whole proof was, based on the rules of the Rambam, in order for Chametz to be Nitek Laseh, it has to be that Tashbisu applies to the Chametz of the guy. And now we're saying, but the Rambam himself doesn't hold that way. So we don't really see a clear-cut path that shows us this idea that there's tashbisu by the chametz of a guy. He says, though, you can't bring a proof the other way and say that for sure there is not tashbisu, because if there was tashbisu, then it would be a lav hanitik laseh, because it anyway can't be a lav hanitik laseh because of the two lavim, Bal Yara and Bal Yamatzeh. The Rambam brought two rules that we saw in Tamura. One is if you have One was the rule that we were speaking about just now, where the asay has to apply in all situations of the lav, in order to be a lav nitik asay. But the Rambam also said it has to match up, one lav and one asay. By chametz we have bal yara and bal yamatzeh, so it's two lavim. So according to the Rambam, there's really two reasons why, or there's a possibility of two reasons why chametz would not be a lav hanitik asay. One reason is clear, is that there's two lavin. Right? So that's clearly why the Rambam would hold that it's not a lav hanitik asay. Is it possible it's also because tashbisu doesn't apply to the chametz of a guy? Maybe yes, maybe not. Right? It's inconclusive. As if we don't really have a proof one way or another from this Rambam. Now, we do possibly have a proof, because the Shagas Aryeh, he understands that the concept of two lavin and one asay works as follows. Now, I don't know if it's mukhrach to say this idea that the Shagas Aryeh is saying, but this is the way the Shagas Aryeh understands it. Why do we say if there's two lavin and one asay, it's not a lav hanitik asay, right, that the lav is removed from the asay, and the asay removes the lav, and therefore you don't get malchus? The reason is because since I have two lavin, the asay can only take care of one of them. And I can still get malchus for the remaining iser. The Shagas Aryeh says it's much different than the other reason that the asay and the los asay don't match. In that case, I should be able to get malchus for each lav. Right, so depending on the reason, should show me how many sets of malchus I get. And the mashmos of the Rambam, because it's not so clear, the mashmos of the Rambam by matzah, when he says malchus, he doesn't say how many. So implication is you get one set of malchus. If you're getting one set of malchus, then we see that the reason why he's getting malchus is because you have two lavin and one asay. The asay takes care of one of the lavin, and you get malchus on another lav. If the reason was because the asay doesn't match the los asay, because tashmisu doesn't apply to the chametz of a guy, then the Rambam should say you get two sets of malchus for bal yara and for bal yamatzeh. So it could be from there we could see that the Rambam holds that no, there is tashbisu by the chametz of a guy, and therefore the asay could knock off one of the los asays. That could be a possible proof. However, this whole line of thought in understanding the Rambam is extremely problematic, as the Shagas Aryeh points out, because by Temura, the Rambam really has a stira, because the Rambam brings two reasons why Temura is not considered nitik asay, as we saw. One is because there's two reasons. One is because there's two lavin, and one is because they're not even. But those two reasons would give us a different result. According to the reason that they're not even, the asay and the los asay, so all the los asays remain, and since there's two los asays, so he's going to get two sets of malchus. According to the reason that there's two lavin and only one asay, so then one asay could take care of one of the lavin and only get one set of malchus. So does he get one set or does he get two sets? There in Temura, it's clear from the Rambam that he only gets one set, because he actually said explicitly, Loka Arbav, he gets 40 lashes. That's one set of lashes. So there he said explicitly you only get one set. In which case, so it's clear that the Rambam holds that the reason is because you have two lavin and one asay. But the Rambam said there's also that other reason that the lavin and asay don't match. According to that, you usually get two sets of malchus. Right? So we're left with just a major confusion in the Rambam, which is we have these two reasons floating around. They seem to create a different result, but the Rambam doesn't seem to pay attention to that. So that's a major question on the Rambam. Another question on the Rambam is that two more questions on this Rambam in Temura. One is a question from the Gemara itself on Temura, in Maseches Temura, Daf Gimel and Aleph, that's Os Hey in the Mara Makomos, and it says over there, Amar of Edi bar Avin, Amar of Aram, Amar of Yitzchak, Amar of Yochanan, Mishum of Yossi Aglili. Kol los nishim b'Torah as asabo ma'isa loka, lo asabo ma'isa pater. Right? This is what the Rambam had quoted. Every los say in the Torah, you only get malchus if you did an action. Chutz mi nishma, nishba, u'meimar, u'makal chavir v'shem. Right? The three cases that the Rambam said. Af b'shal asa ma'isa, chay. That's what the Rambam quoted. The problem is that the Gemara continues when u'meimar, Amar Rav Yochanan l'Tana, Rav Yochanan told the Tana, lo tisni u'meimar. Don't say u'meimar. Mishod de b'diburo asamaisa, because he did a maisa with his speech. Now, since he said that the karbanos should be switched, that causes a maisa to happen. That causes the new carbon to become kadosh, the new animal to become kadosh, and therefore that's considered as if he did an action. That's not what the Rambam said. The Rambam said, goes with like the Havamina of the Gemara, that even though he didn't do an action, he gets malchus. Second problem with the Rambam is, according to the way we end up in the Gemara, shutfin, partners that don't create kedusha on the new animal, therefore did not do a maisa, therefore would not get malchus. And the Rambam says that they do get malchus. Right, so it seems like the Rambam on those 2 points is against the Maskana of the Gemara. Plus, we have the difficulty that the Rambam gave 2 reasons why it's not nikit about saying. Those 2 reasons seem to be contradictory as far as the number of malchus you're supposed to get. And he said that he's going to answer these questions in a later siman. I didn't learn the whole sefer yet, so as opposed to something that says the answer in a different sefer, which we don't have, here, eventually, hopefully, we'll get an answer to this question. But right now, at least in this siman, we're leaving this off as a question. This Rambam about Tmura is extremely difficult. It leaves us with unclarity of how exactly the rules of Lava HaNitik Batsei work according to the Rambam, in which case we don't have really a definite proof to what the Rambam holds about the chametz of a guy because of these issues. So that's one proof, which we left off was not conclusive. The second proof that the Shagat brings, again, what are we trying to prove? We're trying to prove that the chametz of a guy does have the chiyuv of tashbisu, nafkamina, meaning I have to get rid of it even erev Pesach, from the time of Chetzos. And he's bringing a raya from the Gemara in Pesachim, Daf Hey Amud Aleph, Ozvav in the Mar Makomos. Rava Amar, Rava says, Mehacha. This is where we learn it from. What we're trying to learn over here is we're trying to figure out how do we know that when it says you have to get rid of the chametz, but Yom HaRishon, it means erev Pesach. Yom HaRishon generally means the first day. First day, if we're talking about Pesach, we think means the first day of Pesach, not erev Pesach. So Rava learns it from the following logic. Lo sishchar al chametz dam zivchi. The pasuk says you can't shech the carbon Pesach when you have chametz. Lo sishchar Pesach v'dayin chametz kana. That's what the pasuk means. You can't shech the Pesach while you still have chametz. Ve'ima, and therefore what? And therefore it must mean that I have to get rid of the chametz before the zman shchita, which is erev Pesach. The Gemara asks, Ve'ima kol chad v'chad ki shachit. Maybe it doesn't mean that there's a time you have to get rid of your chametz. It's just when you shech the carbon Pesach, you can't have chametz. It's a technicality. You can't shech your chametz while you have, you can't shech your Pesach while you have chametz. But it is not referring to the general time that you have to get rid of where all Klal Yisrael has to get rid of their chametz. The Gemara says, no, zman shchita marachmana. It's not true. The Torah is talking about the time when you have to get rid of your chametz, not the individual person who's shechting when he has to get rid of his chametz. And we're going to discuss how we know that. Right? The Gemara just says it. Tani nami achi, and we have a brayso that says the same thing. Ach b'marishon tashvi yisor b'teichem me'erev yantif. When the pasuk says you have to get rid of your chametz on the first day, it means erev Pesach. Oh, ein ala b'yantif, so maybe it means yantif itself. Tamalomer, therefore the pasuk says sishkar al chametz am zivchi. You can't shech the chametz. Sorry, you can't shech with your chametz the carbon Pesach. So Rabbi Shmuel said the same exact drasha as Rava. So what we see from here is that the chiyuv of getting rid of the chametz seems to be connected to the isser of shechting the carbon Pesach when you have chametz. That's what Rava and Rabbi Shmuel are doing. They're connecting those 2 concepts. And what the Gemara means to say is that it makes sense that the lav of lo sishkat, the reason why I'm over the lav of lo sishkat is because, right, we're getting to the logic of how this works. The reason why I'm not supposed to be, the reason why a person gets an isser for shechting the carbon Pesach when he has chametz is because he really should have already gotten rid of that chametz with the chiyuv of tashbisu. That's the way we're explaining the psukim. That's how we know that tashbisu is before the shechita of the Pesach, carbon Pesach. That's the way we're now explaining what Rava said when he said, that's talking about the zman shechita. It's not talking about the individual shechita. The reason why there's this isser is because he already went over the time of when he's supposed to get rid of the chametz. Now we explained in the previous siman, in siman ayin zayin, that the isser of lo sishchat, not shechting the Karban Pesach when you have chametz, the only time you can get malchus for such a thing is if it's the chametz of a guy that's in your reshus and you took responsibility for. We explained all other chametz you could do bittul. Bittul is something you could do in your mind, with your thoughts. So therefore, Adam can never be mechayiv you for having chametz in your possession when you shech Karban Pesach, if it's a type of chametz you could do bittul to, because they don't know if you did bittul or not. We explained only the chametz of the guy where bittul doesn't work, is there a possibility of getting malchus for this isser. So since we're connecting the isser of lo sishchat, which mainly is talking about the guy's chametz that you took responsibility for, we're connecting that to the mitzvah of tashbisu, of getting rid of the chametz in Erev Pesach, so we see that you have to get rid of the guy's chametz in Erev Pesach. Because those two isurim, or the isser and the mitzvah, are linked together. However, the Shaggad says that cannot be the correct understanding of the Gemara. Because the Gemara cannot be explaining that the reason why you have the isser of lo sishchat is because you were over the isser of keeping the chametz after the time of tashbisu, because the chiyuv of shechting on the chametz applies to chametz that you have with you at the time of shechita in the Beis HaMikdash. As we see in the Gemara, Psachim Daf Samach Gimel Beis, which is Ozayin the Mara Makomos, Amar Rishon ben Lakish, La'olam ino chayv ashi chametz l'shochet ola zorek ola echad b'nei chabura, that the chiyuv is only if one of the people involved has chametz. Va'ashi imo ba'azara, and according to Rish Lakish, it has to be with him in the azara when they're shechting. Rabbi Yochanan says, Af misheinu ba'azara, even if it's not with him. But my kamifgi, and what's the machlokis? Ilima ba'al b'samach kamifgi. We could say that the machlokis, and this is the maskon of the Gemara, that the machlokis is when it says al. The word al doesn't mean it has to be actually there. The Rishon ben Lakish savar al b'samach. Rish Lakish holds it does have to be there. Rabbi Yochanan savar lo b'in al b'samach, because the pasuk says lo sishchat al chametz. So what does it mean al chametz? According to Rish Lakish, it means the chametz got to be there when you're shechting. According to Rav Yochanan, it doesn't have to be there. But, says the Shaggad, even Rav Yochanan agrees that if it was there in the Azara, you're going to be chayiv. He's just saying it doesn't have to be in the Azara, even if it's outside the Azara, you're chayiv. But in the Azara, everyone holds your chayiv if you have chametz in the Azara. Now, are you over the isser of owning chametz? Or, we're really talking about the mitzvah of tashbisu. Is there a mitzvah of tashbisu on chametz that's not in your house, that's with you in the Azara? So he brings the sheet to the Ramban. The Ramban holds that there's never a chiyuv of bal yaram bal yamatzeh unless the chametz is in his house. In which case, there's no mitzvah of tashbisu on chametz which is with you in the Azara. So therefore, according to the Ramban, there cannot be a direct correlation between the chiyuv of tashbisu and the isser of shechting the Karban Pesach with chametz, because I don't have a chiyuv of tashbisu on this particular chametz that I'm being over the isser with. And the Shaggad continues, according to what we've been saying up until now, even if we wouldn't go like the Ramban, that the main isser of lo tishchat al chametz is talking about the chametz of a guy. The chametz of a guy, everyone agrees you're not chayiv unless it's in your house. Right? It's only if it's in your house and you took responsibility for it. So if you have the guy's chametz with you in the Azara, so that for sure is not chayiv in the chiyuv of tashbisu, and nevertheless, that's the case where we're saying that there's a chiyuv of lo sishchat. Furthermore, Tosos understands that if you're keeping the chametz with the intention of destroying it, so you're not over the isser of bal yara. And if so, nevertheless, we said that you can't shech the Karban Pesach without destroying the chametz. So, he wants to explain like this. Even though Tosfos holds that chametz that I'm holding on to with the intent of destroying it, there's no isser of keeping it, but there still would be an isser to shecht the carbon before I destroyed it. Right? So shechting the carbon is more chamor. I can't shecht the carbon with chametz in my possession, even if I'm intending to destroy it. Even though there's no isser, regular isser b'al yirah b'al yamatzeh, or chiyuv tashbisu, I'm not over any of those isurim if my intention is eventually to destroy it. Now you have to say this, says the Shagged Aryeh, because we explained that there is malchus for shechting the carbon Pesach when you own chametz. According to Tosfos, how would the Edom know that I'm holding on to chametz in an usher way? Maybe I'm holding on to the chametz because as soon as I'm done shechting the carbon Pesach, I'm planning on destroying it. So if there would be no isser for the shechita in a situation where there's no isser on the tashbisu and the b'al yirah b'al yamatzeh, so then there'd be no way you could ever give a person malchus according to Tosfos, because the Edom don't know what his intention is to do with the chametz. So it must be that even on types of chametz where there's no mitzvah of tashbisu, there still is an isser to shech the carbon Pesach, having that chametz. So therefore it wouldn't bother us anymore if the chametz of a guy, I don't have the mitzvah of tashbisu, and nevertheless there would be an isser to shech the carbon Pesach if I have it with me. And therefore we lose our proof that there's this chiyuv of tashbisu on the chametz of the guy. Therefore you have to explain the Gemara completely differently, that it's not that the two mitzvahs are linked together, rather the Gemara is just bringing a drasha from an extra pasuk. It says you can make this diak because there's really two psukim. There's a pasuk of lo sishchat al chametz dam zivchi, and there's a pasuk of lo sizbach al chametz dam zivchi. Two separate psukim. One is a pasuk in Parashas Kisisa, which is upcoming week's parasha, Parak Lamed Aleph pasuk Chaf Hey, and there's an earlier pasuk of lo sizbach that's in, I believe it's in Parashas Bo, Parak Chaf Gimel pasuk Yud Ches. No, I think it's in Mishpatim. Sorry, it's Parashas Mishpatim, Parak Chaf Gimel pasuk Yud Ches. Now, which pasuk did they bring in the Gemara? Rava and Rabbi Shmuel. They brought the pasuk of Lo Sishchat Al Chametz Dam Zivchi. That's the second pasuk. That's one found in Kisisa. Why would they bring the second pasuk and not the first pasuk? So Shagged Aryeh is medayik. The reason why they bring the second pasuk is because their drasha is just because the fact that the pasuk repeated itself. That's the drasha. Had it meant that each individual person shouldn't have chametz when he's shechting it, but it's not referring to any time period where I'm not allowed to have chametz, so it should have said it once. The fact that it said it twice teaches us that the zman shechita you already can't have chametz. And that then teaches us that tashbisu applies already from Erev Pesach. So it's not that these two mitzvahs are linked together at all. It's just from an extra pasuk. So again, we went through our second proof, and we can't come out that it is not conclusive. Whether or not there's a chiyuv tashbisu on the chametz of the guy that you took responsibility for. So we have no clear raya from the Gemara. However, the Shagged Aryeh says, from Svara, he wants to prove that you do have to get rid of the chametz of the guy. And why is that? He says, the lashon of the pasuk of Ach biyom harishon tashbisu so'ar mi batechem doesn't say that it's referring to your chametz. It says you have to make sure that there's no chametz in your house. Now, we know that the chiyuv is only on your chametz, right? Let's say you had the chametz of a guy that you didn't have responsibility for, or chametz of hektish that's in your property. You don't have to get rid of that chametz. Why not? It doesn't say the word lecha in this pasuk of Ach biyom harishon tashbisu so'ar mi batechem. Right, that's a pasuk. We have lecha by b'al yirah b'al yamatzeh. We say lo yirah lecha so'ar, lo yirah lecha chametz b'chol gulecha, and from those psukim of lecha we say that excludes chametz that doesn't belong to you. So we see that we are learning one from the other. That from the lecha by b'al yirah, I'm learning that the chiyuv tashbisu is also only for chametz that's yours, and not chametz of hektish or chametz of a guy. Also, we have the Gemara that we quoted before on Hamad Aleph, which says, no, sorry, we didn't quote it, but the Gemara says over there that Shivas Yom Yisrael Limatzi V'Teichem Had it had only that pasuk, I would have thought that the Isser is only in the house. I could have a large property, I could have cars, I could have barns, I could have a yard, and I don't have to worry about chametz there according to this pasuk, because the pasuk just says I can't have chametz in my house. But the pasuk learns out from lo yira lecha sa'ar, lo yira lecha chametz b'chol gvulecha, that I can't have chametz in any of my property. Now, what's the pasuk of tashbisu? It says tashbisu sa'ar mi batechem. So maybe when it comes to getting rid of the chametz of Pesach, I only have to worry about the chametz in my house, not the chametz in the rest of my property. But we know that's not true. I have to get rid of the chametz on all my property. So we see that we're learning all of the rules are going together. The rules of Bal Yira and Bal Yamatzeh apply to the mitzvah of Tashbisu. Because we see, number one, that there's no chiyuv to get rid of the chametz of a guy that you didn't take responsibility for. There's no chiyuv to get rid of chametz of hektish. No chiyuv to get rid of someone else's chametz that's in your house, even though it doesn't say that in the pasuk Tashbisu. And we know you have to get rid of the chametz in all of your property Erev Pesach, even though it doesn't say it in the pasuk Tashbisu. So therefore, I can also learn that I have to get rid of the chametz of a guy that I took responsibility for, even though it's not mentioned in the pasuk of Tashbisu. So therefore, because of that, the Shagat wants to conclude that, in fact, we do see that there is a connection, and the connection, he says, has to be a gezeir shava, from the word sa'ar, right? He uses the word over there, sa'ar mibatechem, and it says lo yira lecha sa'ar, and that's the gezeir shava where we learn the din of Bal Yira and Bal Yamatzeh go together. We learn out from the gezeir shava of sa'ar. So it must be that we use that same gezeir shava to also include tashbisu sa'ar mibatechem, also uses the word sa'ar, that it has also all the same rules. And therefore, since there's an Isser Bal Yira Bal Yamatzeh on the chametz of a guy they took responsibility for, so also there's going to be a chiyuv to get rid of it Erev Pesach. Okay, stop here.
Also, if someone was good